What's going on, guys? Billy here, and welcome to my full beginners and setup guide for the Skydio 2. Now, whether you're totally brand new to flying drones with the Skydio 2 being your first drone, or if this is just a brand new drone amongst all of the others that you own, this is going to be a really great place for you guys to start because the Skydio 2 is a little bit different than other drones that are out there on the market. So, with that said, let's not waste any time and get right into things. So, the first thing that I want to do is take a quick look at the aircraft itself. The frame is rigid with no folding or bending arms, which means the drone isn't as easy to travel with as, say, a Mavic 2 Pro, but the fixed design is actually a must to ensure the autonomy system works. You see, these cameras have to be perfectly aligned to properly work and build that 3D map around the drone in real time, and even the slight flex that a folding drone's arms have could throw the software off. Now, on the topic of obstacle avoidance, this drone has an array of 6 navigation cameras, as Skydio calls them, with 3 positioned on the top and 3 positioned on the bottom. Each of these cameras has a wide 200-degree field of view, and each have a 4K sensor inside of them, totaling for 45 megapixels of visual sensing. You see, other drones on the market typically use a variation of different sensors in order to achieve some level of obstacle avoidance. They'll use low-resolution obstacle avoidance cameras, they'll use vision positioning sensors, optical flow sensors. They also could potentially use infrared sensors in certain areas where obstacle avoidance isn't as critical, as those infrared sensors usually aren't as accurate as a true obstacle avoidance camera. But at the end of the day, nothing really comes close to what Skydio is delivering with their Skydio 2. It makes decisions for itself to avoid obstacles, and it finds new routes to keep up with a moving subject, and to this day, I'm still really impressed with the results. So getting back to the drone, besides these 6 navigation cameras, the rest of the drone is fairly clean, with a spot for a battery underneath that effortlessly connects via a strong magnetic system. Underneath of that battery is where the SD card goes. There's also a 3-axis gimbal mounted on the front, LEDs on the underside, backside, and front of the drone, and finally up top there is a USB-C port for charging and transferring data. Something interesting to note about the propeller design is that the 2 motors on the front are underslung or inverted, which really makes the design of this drone unique. Now, to wrap up the walkthrough of the design, I quickly want to circle back around to the obstacle avoidance sensors or the navigation cameras and show you this little nub that is placed next to each of those different cameras. This is to ensure that no damage is done to the cameras when resting it on a table without the battery installed or resting it upside down again on a table. You need to be careful with how you treat this drone because if you scratch, scuff, or even crack the glass that is protecting these cameras, it could severely impact the autonomous functions of this drone, and it might even prevent you from taking off at all. So now that we've wrapped up our full walkthrough of the Skydio 2 airframe itself, and we've taken a look at exactly what the body of the drone features, I now want to get into how we set up the Skydio 2 application as well as the drone itself. The first steps that you'll need to take is to, of course, download the Skydio app on your mobile device and turn on the Skydio itself. Within the app, after tapping on Get Started, you'll have to go through a couple of necessary steps, like accepting the terms and conditions, allowing location and microphone access through your mobile device, and you'll also have to activate your email, so make sure you have access to it as you'll have to retrieve an authentication code. Once this is all set, the final steps are to enter your Skydio's Wi-Fi information, hold the power button on the battery for 5 seconds until the LEDs on the drone are a solid blue color, and then select Join. From here, we are finally ready to fully use our Skydio 2. Now, moving away from the drone and onto the remote controller, which, fun fact, this remote is borrowed from the Autonomy and is basically identical except for the branding on the right handle, and I'm sure the components on the inside are a little bit different. Now, to begin using the remote, we will first open the phone holder, which also turns on the remote for us. There's no power button here, so the position of the phone mount directly determines whether or not the remote is turned on or off. Now, of course, we have the sticks to control the drone, a status LED on the left handle to gauge what the connection status is, and in the middle here we have a return to home button that sits above the launch and land button. Now, flipping the controller over, we have 2 paddles and 2 buttons flanking a USB-C port in the center for connecting your mobile device and charging the remote controller. On the left side of the remote, the paddle pitches the gimbal up and down, while the button acts as a boost button, so when you're holding this down, it allows you to fly faster. On the right side of the remote, the paddle allows you to fly forwards and backwards, while the button controls the shutter so you can shoot photos and start or stop recording videos. Now, to quickly circle back around to that first point that I made with the Skydio 2 controller being the same as the Autonomy controller, it's pretty obvious that Skydio and Parrot Parrot have entered some sort of partnership for this design. In fact, on the back here, it says Parrot Sky Controller 3, despite it saying Skydio 2 as the branding on the front. And I know I'm going to get a lot of questions down in the comment section below asking, can I use my Parrot Anafi controller with the Skydio 2? Unfortunately, you're not able to, and also vice versa, you can't use the Skydio remote controller with the Parrot Anafi, despite them being pretty much identical, and that's why I'm led to believe the components on the inside are different. They're just not going to pair together. Now, in terms of pairing the Skydio remote controller to the drone, everybody's going to have to do it as soon as you take this remote out of the box, because remember, they're both sold separately. The remote controller is a separate accessory sold for $150, but the process really couldn't be any simpler. All you have to do is open up the controller to turn it on, and then plug the remote into the drone using the included USB-C cord in the box. The controller will almost immediately be linked, so once you see that status LED shine a solid blue light, you can unplug the remote and begin flying. Now, in some of my past videos, I have knocked Skydio 2 for the controller being somewhat of an afterthought. I feel like if they developed their own controller, it could be worlds better. I never really liked the Parrot Anafi's remote controller. It felt small, it felt cheap, it kind of felt like the sticks weren't as precise, but I do have to give Skydio credit where credit is due, because within their application, they give us a ton of different features to really change exactly how the drone flies. So essentially, we're changing the flight characteristics of the drone. When you have the remote paired, you can select the gear icon in the top left corner and change the flight sensitivity of the roll, pitch, yaw, and throttle. Changing these will ultimately change how the drone responds to your control input, but this gives you the opportunity to customize your drone to your liking. Switching gears here, I want to move away from the remote controller and over to the beacon, which just like the remote is sold separately for another $150, but in my opinion, this is the accessory to buy. This is the must-have accessory with the Skydio 2 because it gives you such better control as the drone is flying autonomously and when it's tracking you. Now, I could sit here for hours and discuss every little thing that goes into the beacon, all the features, all the different methods that I've learned. In fact, most of the tracking flights you guys have seen on this channel have been done with the beacon because it offers two main advantages over just using your phone. The first is that it gives you a more reliable tracking experience, and the second is that it gives you more range. You see, if you just use your phone, the Skydio tracks you through software as it analyzes the frame for subject, which theoretically works really well on its own, but when you start moving faster, you really want to have the beacon so that the Skydio has a separate GPS signal to follow, making it much more reliable than just trying to find you within the frame. Now, the cool thing about the beacon is that you can actually manually fly the drone using the little buttons on the front of the remote. It definitely isn't as good of an experience as with the remote controller, but I usually only rely on this if the Skydio gets stuck. Just like the remote controller, pairing the beacon to the Skydio 2 is incredibly easy. You just need to take that included USB-C cable, plug one end into the beacon, plug the other end into the Skydio 2, and it almost immediately pairs. Now, again, as I said, I could sit here for hours and discuss all the little different things that go into exactly how the beacon works, but I've already made a separate tutorial on exactly how you fly the Skydio 2 with the beacon, so I'm going to leave that linked up in the top right corner. I'll also leave a link down in the description, so rather than reiterate everything I said in that video and taking up more of your time, I'm going to let you guys go and watch that video if you're interested in using the beacon with the Skydio 2, because this is a very powerful accessory, and there's a lot more under the surface than what you might think. Moving on, we're now going to cover the firmware update process, which begins within the Skydio app. Select the info button in the bottom right corner from the home menu, select your drone from the device list, and then select update. These updates tend to be a bit larger in size than I'm used to on, say, something like a DJI drone, as we're usually looking at sizes of anywhere between 600 to 900 megabytes, depending on what device you're downloading it from. The downloading process happens independently from the drone, but when it comes time to install the software or the firmware onto the drone, we want to make sure that we have one of the two cables included in the box handy, depending on what device we have, to connect directly to the drone. The process takes a bit and goes through a few prompts and restarts, but once all is finished, the app will let you know. So something that I typically like to do when creating these beginner guides for any of the drones that are coming out is go over some of the first settings you guys should change before your first flight, because there is a whole lot to tackle when digging through some of the different menus in the different apps. for these different drones. But oddly enough, the Skydio 2 doesn't have many settings to change, so instead I wanted to focus on one setting in particular that in my opinion is one of the most important things to know about the Skydio 2, and that is the height floor. So just for your guys' reference, within the Skydio 2 application, you can find the height floor setting from the home menu when we select the gear icon in the top left corner, which brings us right to that height floor toggle to turn this on or off. This app does a pretty good job at explaining it here, as it says Skydio 2 will try to stay at least 8 feet above the ground while tracking for the safety of nearby people and objects. This may degrade tracking performance. Basically, this means that if you're using the Skydio 2 in the autonomous motion tracking mode, and if height floor is turned on, the drone is not going to fly below 8 feet in order to track its subject. Now, of course, this is going to give you a worse tracking experience. It's not going to be as good as if you turned height floor off and allowed the drone to fly underneath of objects. For example, something that continuously happens to me when I'm flying this drone with the height floor turned on is it just gets stuck coming up to different trees. It's not going to go underneath of those trees because it won't go under 8 feet. Now, I'm not telling you guys to always turn height floor on because it's a safety feature. You want to make sure that the drone is always above 8 feet. You have to know when to use it and when not to use it. And I sometimes have my phone in my pocket and I'm flipping height floor on and off as I'm flying around mid-flight. Now, the reason behind this is because let's give an example of somebody biking. And let's say you're on a trail where there could be potentially other bikers or other walkers. You want to make sure height floor is turned on at all times. So if somebody comes up around the corner, the drone is going to be above 8 feet and it's not going to collide with that person coming towards you or that could be passing you. So that's a scenario where you'd want height floor turned on for the safety of others around you. Now, let's say you're out in the middle of nowhere, you're riding your ATV, you could turn height floor off because you know there's going to be nobody you encounter and you want to get the best tracking performance possible. So the drone, if it needs to go around a tree or if it needs to go around an obstacle, will fly under 8 feet to keep up with you, and that footage just looks so good. So just remember, it's all about common sense when you use height floor, and definitely make sure that before you go out and fly, it's turned on or off according to what you want. Now, by far the biggest selling point of the Skydio 2 is its tracking functionality through autonomous flight that I've been alluding to throughout this entire video. Time and time again, I'm impressed by the maneuvers this drone makes around obstacles, and I'm sure that as someone who is looking at this drone for the first time, you're probably wondering how it does this. The software that Skydio uses to build the Skydio 2's firmware is obviously proprietary, it's obviously confidential, but after my time using this drone and having it follow me autonomously, I've gotten a really good general understanding of how the motion tracking autonomous feature or the motion tracking autonomous system works within the Skydio 2. And I think the best way to showcase this to you guys is just to show you a general screen recording from one of my flights earlier today with the drone following me. So once the drone is up in the air, it uses the 6 navigation cameras to map out the world around it and understand what obstacles are nearby. Looking through the application, we can see that the drone locks onto a subject, so at a base level, all the tracking is done by analyzing objects in a frame taken by the main camera to keep the primary subject in focus. Now, this is not different than, say, active track on a DJI drone, but the big difference is when the beacon comes along. So now, once you pair the beacon and begin using it, the Skydio is utilizing both the subject tracking, as I just showed you through the app, and it also utilizes the GPS signal of the beacon. That's why if you want a reliable tracking experience, you really want to look into getting the beacon accessory, because even if the drone loses you in its frame, it still knows where you are with the GPS signal that is being emitted from the beacon itself. Now, for these beginner guide videos, I try to leave my personal opinion out of the conversation, but I just have to say that the colors that come from the drone's camera are incredible. Like, I really don't even have to color grade these clips because they already look so great coming right off of my SD card. Now, I'll put the camera specs up on the screen for those of you guys who might be interested to take a look at, and quite frankly, they are pretty run of the mill. Having the ability to shoot 4K video at 60 frames per second is definitely nice, especially with a drone that is primarily used for capturing up close action, but I still think that the colors that this camera produces is the main talking point here. Now, for those of you who are brand new to the Skydio 2 platform, and especially for those of you who might be brand new to camera drones in general, I want to go through a quick walkthrough of the camera settings, which can be accessed in the top right corner of the Skydio 2 application. From here, working our way down, we can choose between shooting photos and videos, and it also shows us how much space is left on our SD card. When video is selected, we can choose our resolution, our frame rate, we can turn HDR video on or off, We can turn on automatic recording, so if this is turned on, the drone automatically starts recording video once you take off, which is great for if you're using, say, the beacon accessory. And finally, we get to change our video codec. Now, if we switch over to shooting photos, we can add a timer to the shot that we are shooting. We can change our file format between RAW and JPEG. And finally, we can turn HDR photos on or off. Underneath of these settings are the broad exposure and white balance settings that allow you to dial in your image's color and brightness. Now, getting into the final thing that I want to discuss here in this fairly lengthy beginner's guide and setup guide video for the Skydio 2, you really need to understand your limitations when it comes to the Skydio 2. And I'm not talking about FAA regulations, I'm not talking about no-fly zones, because those are an obvious thing that we need to follow, but I'm talking about these weird limitations that Skydio has built into their drone. So just to give you an example, because there could be more out there that I haven't found yet, you can't fly if you don't have an SD card inserted. You can't fly if you don't have over 500 megabytes of free space on your mobile device, I'm guessing to store the flight logs. And finally, you can't fly if there is not enough light for these cameras to see. So this is very much a quirky drone. I've found that you just kind of have to deal with the quirks and you get a really awesome end result as the drone follows you around. I mean, look, it's a great drone, and as a beginner's guide, you guys are really going to understand this after you guys begin to fly the drone a little bit. I know that once I got this drone up into the air, I couldn't imagine how good it did at tracking me, especially in complex environments, and I really can't wait for you guys after watching these beginner's guide to go out and experience it for yourself. So let me know what you guys think of the Skydio 2 after you've flown it down in the comment section below, and as always, I'll talk to you later. Peace.